He looked me in the eyes, the same eyes I once wiped tears from when he had nightmares, and said, "You need to leave. You don't live here anymore." I stood there in my worn sweater, clutching the paper he handed me. An eviction notice, signed by my own son. How does it feel when your child, the one you carried, fed, protected, and prayed for, treats you like a burden to be discarded? I raised Thomas alone after his father passed. I worked double shifts, skipped meals so he could eat, and poured every ounce of love into making sure he never felt like he lacked anything. And for a while, I thought I'd done something right. He went to college, got a good job, married a bright young woman, but then things changed. It started with subtle jabs. "Mom, you wouldn't understand. Maybe you should go live somewhere quieter." Then came the late night arguments, the sideways glances from his wife, the cold silence at the dinner table, and finally, the letter. I never thought I'd end up on the sidewalk, my life packed into a single suitcase. But what Thomas didn't know, and what he couldn't know, was that the apartment he and his wife now claimed as theirs, the entire building it sat in, belonged to me. I never needed to say it before, but sometimes silence is mistaken for weakness. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear might just restore your faith in justice, or break your heart. I used to believe Thomas was the kindest boy in the world. When he was little, he used to help me bring groceries up 3 flights of stairs, his tiny arms wobbling with the weight of the bags. He'd kiss my cheek without asking and say, "You're my best girl, Mom." That memory. It's the one that kept me going through the hard years. When his father died in that accident, Thomas was only 6. I still remember the funeral, how tightly he held my hand and whispered, "I'll take care of you now." That promise echoed in my heart every time I worked double shifts at the diner, picked up extra cleaning jobs, or went without so he could have his school supplies. I never remarried, not because I didn't have offers, but because I didn't want him to ever feel second. Everything I did for him. When he got into university on a partial scholarship, I cashed out what little savings I had and sold the gold bangles my mother left me. He cried when he found out, said he'd pay me back one day, but life moves quickly. Thomas graduated, got a good job in finance, and moved back home just for a few months. I offered him the top floor apartment, rent-free. He brought his girlfriend with him, then fiance, then wife. I welcomed her with open arms. I thought we were becoming a family again. At first they were warm, but slowly, Thomas changed. He didn't talk to me the way he used to. He started calling me Ma with this clipped, distant tone. Decisions about the house were made without asking. The dinners we once had together became awkward silences. And his wife, well, she never said anything outright, but her eyes spoke volumes. Like I was an unwanted guest in my own building. I told myself it was just the stress of marriage, the pressures of adulthood. But I started to feel something shift, a coldness settling into the corners of our lives. Still, I never imagined he would take it this far. Not Thomas, not my son. It was a Sunday morning when I found it, a crisp white envelope sitting right next to the kettle I had just finished boiling for my tea. I assumed it was a bill at first, maybe something that had slipped under Thomas's door and ended up on the kitchen counter. But when I saw the name typed on the front, Margaret Hill, I knew it wasn't a mistake. I opened it slowly. My hands shook before I'd even read the first line. Notice to vacate. My breath caught. I read it again, thinking I must have misunderstood, but there it was in black and white. Cold, legal language telling me I had 30 days to move out. No explanation, no conversation, just a deadline. The paper slipped from my fingers. I sat down, staring into nothing. It wasn't the letter that hurt the most, it was the silence. The fact that Thomas hadn't said a single word to me. No knock on the door. No, "Mom, we need to talk. Just this." That evening I confronted him. He was standing at the sink, rinsing out a wine glass as if nothing was wrong. "Thomas," I said, holding the paper out, "what is this?" He barely looked at it. "It's what it says." "What it says," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady, "is that you're kicking me out of the home I gave you." He sighed, like I was the inconvenience. "It's not personal, Ma. We need the space. Things are tight with the baby coming. You'll be fine. There are good senior homes in the area." That word senior hit harder than any slap. "You want to send me away like some piece of old furniture?" His wife walked in just then and stood behind him, silent and smug. Thomas wouldn't even meet my eyes. We've made our decision. It's done." And just like that, he walked past me, brushing my shoulder as if I were a stranger in his way. I slept very little that night. I sat by the window, hands wrapped around a lukewarm mug, staring at the street I'd lived on for over 30 years. All I could think was, he doesn't know. He doesn't know what he's just done. Thomas always assumed I was poor, and I never corrected him. I never wore expensive clothes. I reused tea bags. I bought my coats from thrift shops and never owned a new phone. To him, I was just mom, simple, old-fashioned, someone to be looked after, humored, or eventually discarded. But here's the truth. I own the building, every brick, every inch of plaster, every pipe and cable. I bought it 25 years ago with the settlement from your father's accident. He was working at a construction site when the scaffolding gave way. The company paid out quietly to avoid court. I used that money to buy this 4-unit building in cash. I kept quiet about it, out of fear and out of instinct. I figured if I kept my head down, I'd never be a target. So I lived in the bottom unit and rented the rest. I managed repairs myself, fixed plumbing with my own hands, and dealt with difficult tenants when I had to. The rent from the other units carried me through when work was thin, and when Thomas came back from university, I gave him the top unit, my nicest one, without saying a word about ownership. I wanted him to feel independent. I thought, let him believe he's providing for me now. Let him feel proud. I thought it was an act of love. But now, looking back, I realize how love and silence can sometimes plant dangerous seeds. He assumed he had the power, that I lived in his house, that I was under his roof, that he could make the rules. But Thomas never asked how we'd survived all those years. He never once asked how the bills were paid, how the repairs were handled, how the taxes never overwhelmed us. He just assumed. I never corrected him because I never imagined I'd need to. Until now, I sat there in my tiny living room, staring at that letter, and for the first time in years, I let the truth of who I was settle in my bones again. I wasn't just Ma, I wasn't just the help, I was the owner, and if he wanted me out, well, he was gonna find out exactly what that meant. I hadn't seen Mr. Kaplan in over a decade, but his voice hadn't changed. "Margaret," he said, peering over his glasses. "Well, this is a surprise." "I need to update the ownership records," I told him, placing the old folder on his desk. Inside were the original purchase documents, the deed, the title, everything proving I was the sole legal owner of the building. Mr. Kaplan flipped through the pages slowly, nodding. "Well," he said, tapping the final page, "everything's still in your name. Nothing's changed. Why now?" I paused. I didn't want to tell him the full story. It still felt too raw, too humiliating. "My son served me an eviction notice," I said simply. "He doesn't know I own it." Mr. Kaplan sat back in his chair. "And you want to?" "I want to make sure I still have control over every unit." I never added his name to anything, and I don't plan to. He nodded. "You're protected. Legally, he can't remove you, but if you want to formalize the rental terms, we can issue him a tenancy agreement. Or terminate it." Terminate. The word echoed in my mind. I looked out the window. It was starting to rain, soft drops sliding down the glass like the tears I refused to shed. "No," I said quietly, "not yet. I want to give him the same chance I gave him when he was 10 and broke that neighbor's window, the chance to tell the truth." Mr. Kaplan looked at me for a long time before nodding again. "You always did have more grace than most." I left his office with the papers clutched tightly to my chest, not for protection, but as a reminder that I wasn't powerless, I wasn't unwanted, I wasn't disposable. If Thomas wanted a lesson in ownership, in humility, in consequences, it would come, but not with anger, with truth. I waited 3 weeks. Not because I was scared, but because I wanted to give him every possible chance to come to me, to knock on my door, to say he was sorry, but nothing came. No apology, no explanation, just the ticking clock on the 30-day notice he'd handed me, counting down like a bomb in my own home. So on the 22nd day, I got dressed in my nicest blouse, the one he once complimented when he was 12, and walked up the staircase to the top floor apartment. I knocked. He opened the door, confused. "Ma?" His wife was behind him, folding laundry. She didn't look up. I handed him a folder. "I think it's time you read this." He opened it, slowly. As he flipped through the deed, the purchase receipt, and the tax records, the color drained from his face. "What is this?" he asked, barely a whisper. "That," I said calmly, is proof I've owned this building since you were a boy. The apartment you live in, the one you're trying to evict me from, is mine. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I let you live here because I wanted you close. I never told you because I wanted you to feel like you were taking care of me. I thought maybe that would make you feel proud, independent. His wife stepped forward, now clearly listening. You own this whole place? I turned to her. Every inch. Thomas sat down on the arm of the couch. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I didn't think I'd need to, I said softly. Because I thought love would be stronger than pride. The silence in the room was thick. I'm not going to evict you, I said, but the notice you gave me, it's void, legally and morally. I turned to leave, then paused. Thomas, you're about to become a father. One day your child will look at you the way you used to look at me. Make sure you deserve it. And then I walked away, not angry, not bitter, but finally standing in the full truth of who I was. It arrived a week later, slipped under my door in the early morning, written on the same ivory stationery I'd once used to teach Thomas how to write thank you notes. Just seeing my name in his handwriting brought tears to my eyes. Dear Mom, it began. I don't know where to start. I've been staring at this page for hours, trying to find the words. The truth is, I'm ashamed. I don't recognize the man you saw at that door, and I'm terrified that maybe you don't recognize your son anymore either. I had to sit down. I thought providing meant controlling. I thought I was helping by taking over. But what I really did was push away the one person who ever sacrificed everything for me. I let pride make me cruel. I let fear make me small. And I let someone else's judgment cloud the memory of who you really are. He never mentioned his wife. And I didn't need him to. I'm sorry for the letter, for the words I said, and for all the ones I never did. I know now that love isn't about power, it's about presence. And you were always there, even when I didn't deserve it. At the bottom, in the same shaky hand I used to guide when he was little, he wrote, "If there's still room for a son in your heart, I'd like to come downstairs and talk." I folded the letter slowly, held it to my chest, and wept, not because I was broken, but because something in him had finally woken up. I opened the door before he even knocked. He stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes red-rimmed. No bravado, no pretense. Just a boy, my boy, looking for his mother. "I don't know if I deserve it," he said. "You don't," I replied, without cruelty. "But neither did I when you forgave me for missing your first school play because I was working a night shift." His lips trembled. "Forgiveness isn't about who's right," I said, stepping aside. "It's about who's willing to make things right." He stepped in slowly, like someone entering holy ground. We sat at the kitchen table just like we used to. No accusations, no defenses. Just quiet truth between two people who finally saw each other again. And in that silence, I realized sometimes justice doesn't look like punishment. Sometimes it sounds like a door opening and a son finally coming home. It's been 3 months since that letter. Thomas still lives upstairs, but the tone has changed. He comes down often, sometimes just for a cup of tea, sometimes to ask how I'm feeling. We don't talk about the eviction notice. We don't need to. Some things are better left as scars than reopened wounds. His wife stays quiet around me now, more distant. But maybe that will shift in time, maybe not. I've stopped waiting for apologies I may never hear. What matters is that my son found his way back. I've learned that power doesn't always come from revealing what you have. Sometimes it comes from knowing who you are and standing quietly in that truth until the world adjusts. I still wear my thrifted coats, still reuse my tea bags. But now, when Thomas looks at me, he sees more than just Ma. He sees the woman who built a life in silence and never needed to raise her voice to reclaim it. He once said I was his best girl. Now I think he remembers why. So I ask you, what would you have done in my place? If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. In our next video, a daughter leaves her mother in a nursing home until she discovers a letter that changes everything.